My name is Rawlson King, and you're tuned into the Griot in me. So I was born and raised in Canada. I was born in 1976 in Toronto, Ontario. And my parents came here in the late 1960s. And I have multiple siblings, but I was the only person in my immediate family who was born in Canada. St. Vincent and the Grenadines. They migrated from that Eastern Caribbean country. They migrated before it actually obtained independence in 1979. So they came to Canada as British subjects. My father was actually born in Aruba. So I have family all across the Caribbean. I still have family in Aruba. I have family in St. Vincent. I have some family who had migrated to Trinidad and Tobago. And I also have a number of family members on both sides of my family who came to both Canada and the United States. Well, they came here for the economic opportunities and the fact that Canada at the time was a more progressive country, which was very important. When my parents first came, they were sponsored by my uncle, and he had initially went to the United Kingdom, to England to live, and he experienced England, I guess, in post-war. He had the post-war British experience, and that was a negative one. It was not a very open place for people from other areas of the Commonwealth. So he had decided to settle in Canada, and he got a job in Canada and established himself. And so I think that he told my parents there were better opportunities there. As well, you think about the milieu in the United States with the civil rights movement at the time. If you're going to move your family and raise a family, you want to probably be in a more welcoming place. And Canada was a more welcoming place in comparison to the U.S. So that's one of the reasons why they made that decision. And there were greater economic opportunities in their mind as well in Canada. Well, I think it's a great country, but it has challenges. And the reason why I think it's great is not because it's, we've got all these natural resources or economic opportunities or, generally harmonious relations or it's a peaceful place and all the things that often are spoken about that really build up the mythos of the country. These things are important and they do exist to a certain degree, but they're definitely challenges. But the wonderful thing about our system is that we can evolve. And that's a very important thing. We can evolve to actually address these challenges through our political system. And I think that is actually quite an important thing that not many people have. I think that is one of the good things that we inherited from the British Westminster system of government is that we have a system where we can have continuous change for the better, a democratic system where people can actually contribute their voice and actually, participate in the political process. So I think that that's important, that we have the capacity to change. I think of when I was in university at Carleton, and we're talking about political science here, and there was somebody from Europe who was a visiting professor, and he was teaching this legal studies class that I was in. And he said, I'm in Canada to study the political system and its constraints, but also its benefits. Because at the time, Quebec separatism was an issue. And he said, what's interesting is he came from Austria and from the Baltics. And as we know, there's a phrase called Balkanization, and there's a reason for that, the idea of states splitting apart. And he said, I came to Canada to explore the unity that your country has, despite the fact that you were actually having a debate about unity. So he said, at the time, it was interesting to be in a country where the representative of the head of state, the Governor General, was a Francophone. The head of the civil service was a Francophone. The head of the government, the prime minister, was a Francophone. The head of the official opposition, who was at the time a member of the Bloc Québécois, who was wanting to pull the country out of Confederation, was a Francophone. The head of the speaker of the House of Commons at the time was a Francophone. So he sat down.
The early 90s.
Yes. So he sat down and said, "This is interesting. What's the problem?" He was kind of being sarcastic, but he said, in the countries where I grew up in, people would be killing each other. And here you have a situation where people are talking about the basic fabric of the country, and they can actually achieve that through the democratic institutions that you have, which means that evolution of those democratic institutions are possible within themselves. And when we think about that, not many countries have that. Not many countries could have a debate around sovereignty and around breaking up a country inside its own democratic institutions and do it in a civil way. So it's very important. And so it's always been the potential of the country. We have definite problems in terms of equity, whether it's equity for Black people, equity for our Indigenous people, where there is where there's a defined constitutional relationship, but we can actually utilize the existing system to build improvements for people. So we have a healthy, evolutionary type, inclusive type of democratic system with healthy democratic institutions. And that's what gives me a lot of hope that we can actually seek change within our lifetime within the democratic institutions. Yes, there'll be pushback from other areas of society, but that's what we would expect in a democratic society. But we can do that in a peaceful and a structured way. It's interesting because I was born in the country. I didn't really see there being challenges in the traditional way. So, I felt through and through that I was a Canadian. And the interesting thing is when people challenge you on that, you wanted to assert your right to say, I was born here, I was raised here, so this is my country, and I will take fully participate in it. So it's different when you're born here versus maybe the experience that my siblings had when they were here, because I didn't feel the difference. I felt pushback from people, and that might have been more on racial overtones and differences in culture. But the reality is that not unlike other people who are born here, this is their reality. I have no other country in a sense. This is where I was born and raised. And so it's important for us to participate in the processes as fully as possible, whether it's in our economy, whether we are adding to the businesses that are in a community, whether we are participating in the professions, to become doctors or lawyers, or whether we are participating in politics to advance the necessary changes that are required for our communities. So the way I view it is that being Canadian that's a political construct. We are born in a geographic place. We have rights, we have opportunities, we have privileges, we have responsibilities, and we should take the full measure of those things and try to contribute not just to our cultural groups, which is very important, but also to the wider fabric of the country at large. And I think that we're seeing a generation of children of immigrants who are doing that very successfully. And so that's what I want to continue to see, that down the road our contributions will be highly valued, but they won't be looked at as something that is extraordinary. Like, Rawlson King being the first Black person elected to city council in the history of the city. I think that what we should be seeing is multiple Black people in different councils throughout government, and seeing that as just a normal state of affairs, since we represent a large proportion of the Canadian population. So that's how I see things. Obviously, there has been challenges with racism and discrimination and other things, but I think the reality is that other groups also have experienced that. They've overcome that. We're going to continue to overcome that. We can do that within some of the systems that are in place. And if institutions and systems that are in place are not sufficient, then they will evolve, or we will replace them. We will work for improvements and changes. So that's the way I view it. I think that, as a child of immigrants, it is harder. We have to work harder, whether it's in education, whether it's in our workplaces, because there is that challenge that confronts us, that we typically have to be 10 times better than our counterparts. But people are working hard, and I'm encouraged by that, and they are making progress. And we're seeing that throughout the different professions, in politics, in business. And I think that that's the trend that we have to continue to follow. Well, I think that's the natural evolution. We have to remember too that many Black immigrants are really new. It's not as if they've had 100 years in the country to establish themselves. It takes a while to establish ourselves. And so that is a process, an ongoing process. But we're no different than, I think, some of the other cultures who came here. You have to establish yourself, establish a basis of wealth, establish people in professions, establish people in business. Once you have people in place in those areas, then they're going to demand greater political representation. You'll see now more people elected. So it is an ongoing process. There's a continuity to it. And we have to remember, especially for West Indian communities and also French African communities, that the amount of time in Canada has not been as long as other immigrant groups, Ukrainians, Polish people, Italian people, who've had a longer period of time often in the country to establish themselves, who had a lot of the same types of discriminatory challenges. The Irish, had these discriminatory challenges. The Greeks. So this unfortunately is a replicating trend that we see with immigrants, that they have to really work hard and fight hard to establish themselves and to also establish rights. But it's part of the process. And what I'm encouraged with is actually living in the time when we're seeing that come to fruition. We're seeing strong businesses being established. We're seeing people enter the professions, establishing greater amounts of wealth, establishing greater inroads in terms of structures for communities, and then also moving into political representation, realizing that since we're not around the table, we're not seeing our interests reflected in public policy. So taking the next step to ensure that we have people around the political table who will advocate for better conditions that would lead to a better quality of life for not just those specific communities, Black communities, but the wider community as well, whether it's across the city or across the nation. So I think we're seeing this, but it's a natural evolution. Well, I think, it's all these elements and continuing to strengthen them. So we really need to have more people in the professions. We need more doctors, more lawyers. We need more people starting businesses, being entrepreneurial, following their dreams, building wealth. We need to have better wealth retention and wealth creation in our communities. And then we need to have that political representation piece that follows, that ensures that we're advocating for better conditions so that we can have more doctors, more lawyers, more business people. I mean, the reality is we want to accelerate the course, especially for new immigrants, and we want to better the conditions. As an example, when my parents came to this country, when my mother came to this country, they had teaching qualifications. And because it was a colony that they came from and not its own independent country, they went to a black university. They went to the University of West Indies at Jamaica and Mona. They actually had to travel to another island to get their education. And because it was a black university, the final papers could not be marked by the black professors, God forbid. So the papers were sent to Cambridge. Right, so my mother's final examination papers were marked by professors, ideally white professors at Cambridge University in the UK, one of the ancient major universities in the UK. Whenever anybody talks about a university in the UK and they're very elitist, they're only talking about two, Oxford and Cambridge. So her final papers went to Cambridge, came back. She passed, she had her certificate, comes to this country, immigrates to this country with that teaching certificate, and the teaching certificate is not recognized. So she cannot become a teacher in Ontario. But if she had been growing up in Ontario and took a 6-month course after high school, then she would be permitted to teach. And so we hear the same story, still.
Now, 40
years later. So the first job that she had to take when she came to this country, despite the fact that she had a teaching certificate from an internationally renowned and known university, where the final paper was marked in Cambridge and brought back. Her first job in Toronto was in a factory. And so, we have to think, where have we come in the space of 40, 50 years? Right. And this is why now we have to look at that political dimension to say, how do we change that experience? Because you hear about these stories, people who are well educated. When I went to university, one of the things that I had learned was whether it was a refugee or whether it was economic migrant, the education levels, because the government is looking at who's coming into the country, is typically higher than the native-born population in the country. So you would, maybe have 50 or 60% graduation rates. People who come to this country, most of them will have post-secondary education that often is not recognized. And so they cannot automatically enter into those professions. They cannot automatically become doctors and lawyers because those educational qualifications have not actually been recognized. So that means that we still have political work to do to ensure that people who come are not replicating the same type of experience 40 or 50 years later. And so that's absolutely important, I think, and something that we have to give serious consideration to. There are challenges at the municipal level. Obviously, those aren't within the bailiwick of municipal politicians, but that's something that we have to continue to look at. How do we improve the quality of life of people who come over? Because we do not want to deny people economic opportunity. We want people to come to this country and grow not only their economic opportunities, but the economic potential of the entire country. And so that's wasted economic potential if people cannot get the appropriate employment opportunities, cannot get access to capital for entrepreneurial opportunities. So it is important for us to continually work on those issues. And that's why it's important for us to be looking at all of the areas, not considering them silos, whether it's business, whether it's the professions, whether it's politics. We have to all work together to strengthen the potential opportunities that we can create for our community so that they can just grow stronger in the future. Well, in a roundabout way, we actually did that. So when I came to office, there was a racial incident in our ward. Somebody had sprayed the N-word on the garage of a longtime resident, actually a medical doctor who was providing a tremendous amount of services to our wider community. They hadn't experienced that type of racism before. The community emerged and said, you know what? This is horrible, but we also have systemic racism that affects our communities. We need to have a solution to that. And they felt a solution would be an anti-racism policy unit at the city that was working on improving employment equity, improving governance opportunities for racialized people, improving economic development opportunities for racialized people, and ensuring that we have mechanisms to address anti-Black racism, Islamophobia, anti-Semitism. So we sat down, we had meetings, we brought people in the community together to say, how would you like this to proceed? How would you like this to move forward? They provided input. Then I took that, talked to different social service organizations, created a proposal, took that to my council colleagues who provided input, said, you know, we can improve this way and improve that way. And then took it to the mayor and said, you know, people from the community have asked for an anti-racism secretariat at the city to address systemic discrimination and racism that is occurring in all specters of government public services that we deliver, employment opportunities. I talked to my colleagues. We were trying to be very consultative over a full summer, and he took a look at the proposal and said this was well researched. It was you consulted with communities, and now we will move forward with the creation of this anti-racism policy unit, which will first engage in a wider, extensive consultation with racialized people, including Black communities, to create an action plan, a multi-year action plan to address systemic racism in city government through the provision of public services that would translate into a work plan that would come back for council to be ratified, and a work plan where the head of that secretariat would come back to City Council to really outline the progress that has been made. So in a sense, we have consulted communities. We're asking for a multi-year plan. And it will, once the city government and bureaucracy creates this unit, they will be consulting extensively with communities to say, what can we do to improve equity across the city of Ottawa in all different areas of life, primarily, employment opportunities, governance, economic development, youth development, and health outcomes. So we're going to see some really substantive movement over the next year, and I'm really gratified that, in the short period of time that I've been in office, about 8-9 months, that we've actually been able to get that type of movement at the city. Well, it's interesting, I like to think of myself as a regular guy. Now, when you walk into the room, people are like, you're the councillor, and they can be deferential. But the reality is that municipal government should be about the regular person, because it's really delivering the majority of services that we interface with on a daily basis.
For people who do not know what municipal government is, what does that mean?
Means the city right. Government, or town government, or village government, but it's the level of government that really runs the direct services in the place that you live. So we're talking about when you wake up in the morning and you go to brush your teeth and take a shower, you turn on the water. The municipal government, the city government, is providing water and is mandated to ensure that it's clean, safe, potable, usable. When you turn
schools and the OC Transpo? Or
Well, yeah. So when you step out of your house and you wait to catch a bus, the bus OC Transpo is a city delivered service. When the bus takes off and drives down the roads are maintained by the city. When it comes to a stop and you see all that traffic light infrastructure, that's maintained by the city. When you drive by that park that is next to your school, that is also operated by the city. When you walk through that park to go to the community center, that is operated by the city. When you drop off your kids there, after you walk through that park to get into that community center, and there's a daycare that's operated, that is operated ultimately by the city. If you live in public housing, that is operated by the city. So there's a tremendous amount of city services that we interface with every day that are operated by the city and are governed by city council. So it's very important. Unfortunately, that's the level of government that most likely is ignored. Only 3 out of 10 people will actually vote in a municipal election, despite the fact that it is delivering the bulk of the services, and it is the most important level of government for most people because they are interfacing the most with those services. Now, it's important to be involved in all levels of government. So in the provincial level of government, which deals with wider issues and is actually directly responsible for municipal government, gives cities their authority to do anything, and the federal government, which deals with more national and international issues. But what I always find amusing is that people will get more exercised about the federal issues. People, and rightly so, I think people should be involved in politics at that level, and they are. They're more involved at that level. We want to see a greater turnout level. It used to be 8 or 7 out of 10 people voting in federal elections. Increasingly now it's 6 out of 10 people who are voting in elections. So we're getting to that 60% threshold. Used to be at an 80% threshold. But more people will turn out for a federal election and get exercised about, as an example, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, even if they've never been to Israel or Palestine, and they'll get really upset about that. But they're not as upset about the trash or the water or about the transit service in the reflection of their electoral participation. So I find that's very interesting. It's something that we want to work to ensure that there's more people participating in the political process, that there's more civic engagement, because it's very important to be involved in your community. And I think one of the challenges that we have is that when people think about their communities, they still think just in that cultural role or cultural milieu. They're very involved. They could be very politically involved, but that does not mean that they are actually involved in city government, government as an institution. And I think it's not only important for people to be involved in their direct cultural communities, it's also important for them to be involved in their wider community, in their wider geography, whether it's their cities, their towns, and have a more fulsome say on how things are governed there. Every day, I think the people around me, people in my community, I think it's very important to ensure that people have proper representation and support. And people are doing great things in communities every day. And so I look at what they're doing and the efforts that they're putting in, and I say to myself that we need greater supports for people. And so that's what inspires me is people in my community every day who are unsung heroes doing hard work. They're working with youth, they're working with seniors, they're working to make our communities a better place in terms of social services. They're engaged in communities through their religious organizations, through their churches, through their mosques, through their synagogues, and they're working to make the city a better place. And that's the model that I utilize every day when I go into City Hall. How can I leave the city a better place than it was the day before? And it's just, it's incremental. I used to think you have to have these grand designs, but if we can leave somebody in a better place every day, then we've done our job. And so I kind of utilize that model, people in the community and the good work that they're doing, and trying to superimpose that at government, trying to every day improve the quality of life of people. That it's a collective effort. It's not an individual effort. If you're trying to improve a community, if you're looking in politics, you're trying to get elected, I have to work with a tremendous number of community members. If you are undertaking education, so I'm encouraging people to become doctors, to become lawyers, right? You have to have a support system. You have to be reliant upon your family. So when you're moving a community forward, you're moving a neighborhood forward, a city forward, a ward forward, you have to be collaborative. And you realize that you need to have a multitude of connections, that you can't really do it by yourself. It takes a village, absolutely. And it's very important. It takes a village to really build a city. And it takes a city to build a country. And you realize those interconnections when, especially as a politician, when you're meeting people all the time who are doing wonderful work in the community, the efforts that are necessary to do that. So it's definitely a collaborative, it's a team effort in order to build community. And it's really important to focus on that, on the collaborative nature of our relationships to strengthen communities. I think it would be building a greater unity and capacity in all areas, especially in politics. So I think it's important for us to have a greater organizational strength in order to ensure that we can work to get more Black people elected to office, so that we can ensure that our views are reflected around council tables or in legislatures, whether they're provincial or federal. So I think it's important for us to, we're multiple communities. It's Black communities, plural. So there are going to be differences in terms of our wants, desires, needs, and that is reflected culturally. But we have to build bridges internally to ensure that we can organize in a strong way like other cultural communities, so that we can have maximum impact in terms of electoral races, in terms of influencing policy. I think that's absolutely key and critical. I think work hard and keep your eyes on the prize, and always be focused on ensuring that you are trying not only to improve your lot in life, but also your wider community. You obviously want to be successful, and I would encourage people to work hard at being successful. It is hard work, whether you want to be an entrepreneur, whether you want to enter into a profession, become a doctor, a lawyer, an engineer. It takes a lot more work than other people around you who are well established. But work hard, achieve that personal success, but don't achieve it just so that you can enrich yourself or better yourself. Then take those experiences and that professional experience, personal experience, and use it to really enhance your community. And not just your own cultural community, the wider community. Take full advantage of citizenship. You're a citizen, not just of your specific community, but also of your city, of your province, of your country. You can actually make tremendous inroads there, and also make tremendous inroads for the diaspora, whatever other community that you're from. People who build up capacity and resources here, and then help improve resources in their former countries, in their home countries, are the most impressive stories to me. I think of people who have worked hard, they've built some wealth here, and then they work to bring ambulances back to their original African country to enhance their communities. I think that's incredible. So that's what I would encourage people to do. Work hard, do become successful, but see that as a stepping stone to making your own community and country and world more successful. Means a story, and maybe that's what we've been alluding to all the while in this interview, is that you are writing and authoring a story, and it's a story of your life, and you're also impacting stories that other people are authoring their own lives, and you want to have a wonderful story at the end of the day. You hear about a lot of despair, especially in the Black communities, around some of the social conditions, around poverty. And I think the reality is that those are sad stories and those need to be written. But we want to see more hopeful and joyful stories written. And I think that should be what our aim is, that we should have a literature ultimately of celebration, not just one of lament. And I think that's what's really important to me, is moving that dial so that we have better conditions for people to be more successful in their lives, so that when they are writing in their diaries or they're leaving stories for their children, they're more hopeful ones than the previous generation. So that's what Griot means to me. It means stories, but stories not just of, because often there's a stereotype that is associated with those stories, just the history of slavery and suffering. But I think what's also necessary is a history of fulfillment, not just personal, but community fulfillment, actually making strives to improve community. So that's what I would like to see in terms of future stories. At the end of my life, to be reading about a number of professionals, people who've been successful, who have really contributed to greater success, measurable success in our communities. To see us at a better place than where we started would be a key for me.